Welcome to this explainer. Today we're putting on our historical detective hats to look at the geology of the underworld and decode these ancient gateways to hell. We're going to dig into sources that merge wild urban legends with ancient history to figure out the actual fascinating scientific truth behind these incredibly famous cursed locations. We're going to break down the evidence, look at the hard science, and honestly, completely reframe how we view ancient mythology.
So let's dive right in and ask ourselves, were these terrifying urban legends of the ancient world based on real, physical phenomena? For centuries, ancient texts have described literal entrances to hell. We're talking dark, foreboding places where mortals absolutely feared to tread, and where just crossing the threshold meant certain doom. Now, it's super easy for us to sit back today and dismiss these stories as pure fantasy, right? Just spooky folklore designed to keep people in line and make sure they respect the gods. But what if there was tangible physical proof right in front of them? What if these gateways were actual physical places on a map? Just imagine what it would be like to stand on the edge of a literal abyss that behaved exactly the way the myths described.
For a perfect example, let's look at the Plutonian at Hierapolis. This was a legendary site, a bustling major religious center in the ancient world that was built directly over a cave, and its reputation? Absolutely terrifying. Historical accounts tell us that animals led to the temple gates as sacrifices would instantly drop dead. And I mean instantly. They weren't struck by lightning, they weren't attacked, there were literally zero visible weapons. They would just suddenly collapse, completely lifeless, without a single physical mark on them. Put yourself in the shoes of a regular citizen of the ancient world witnessing that spectacle. You see this massive, completely healthy animal walk up to the mouth of a dark, misty cave and just die right in front of a massive crowd. No wonder they called it an entrance to hell.
But here's where the plot thickens, because Hierapolis wasn't just some isolated anomaly. When we look at a categorical list of these cursed, haunted sites across history, a really distinct pattern starts to emerge. We see the cave at the Plutonium, sure, but we also see other ancient temples that were specifically constructed around seemingly lethal chambers. Across all of these scattered sites, we find consistent reports of the exact same phenomenon: instant, totally unexplained death for the animal sacrifices. And yet, and this is the crazy part, right next to the dead animals, we have the miraculous survival of the presiding priests. The animals dropped dead, but the humans leading them by the rope, they walked away completely unharmed.
It's like a giant puzzle. The overarching mystery here is absolutely fascinating. What was the shared, invisible culprit haunting all these distinct locations? If we were treating this like an episode of a true crime show, we'd be looking at the string of clues pinned to a corkboard and realizing, wow, we have a serial offender on our hands. These locations are spread out across entirely different regions, yet the physical mechanics of the miracles, or the curses, taking place inside them are identical. So what actually links them all together?
Let's treat this exactly like a cold case and ask, who or what was the invisible killer? What invisible force could strike down a massive bull in seconds without touching a single hair on the priest's head? It definitely wasn't a weapon. It wasn't some poison secretly slipped into their food before the ceremony. It was something present in the very air they were breathing. To actually solve this, we have to strip away all the supernatural explanations of the time and look purely at the physical environment and the geology of these specific caves. Well, it turns out the killer was just basic chemistry. The geological truth is that these sites were plagued by massive, suffocating carbon dioxide emissions bubbling up from deep within the Earth's crust. You see, these temples weren't just randomly placed. They were purposely built directly over highly active geological fault zones where fissures in the rock constantly leaked enormous volumes of CO2. When you concentrate that much carbon dioxide into a small, enclosed cave system, it doesn't just make you a little lightheaded. It creates a highly lethal, completely suffocating environment that literally shuts down the mammalian respiratory system in a matter of moments.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates the contrast between the terrifying myth of a supernatural gateway and the precise clinical science of poisonous geological gases. On the left side, the ancient mind sees the wrath of the gods. They see the literal breath of the underworld reaching out from the dark to claim a blood sacrifice. But on the right side, the modern scientific mind sees tectonic plate activity, subterranean gas emissions, and the rapid displacement of oxygen. It's the exact same physical event occurring in real time. We're just viewing it through completely different lenses of human understanding.
But wait, hang on. This brings us to a massive question, a real plot hole in our investigation that we absolutely have to answer. If the gas pouring out of the ground was so incredibly lethal, how on earth did the ancient priests survive leading the animals to the slaughter? They were walking into the exact same caves, standing on the exact same dirt, in the exact same environment.
If the CO2 was killing a massive, powerful bull in seconds, those human priests should have been dropping right alongside them, right?
The answer all comes down to the incredible physics of the gas itself. Carbon dioxide is heavier than the standard mixture of air that we breathe. Because it's heavy, it doesn't just float up into the sky. It settles low to the ground in this thick, invisible layer right on the cave floor. The sacrificial animals, whether they were dogs, sheep, or even bulls with their heads lowered as they were led by the nose, were relatively short. Their noses and mouths were completely submerged inside that concentrated toxic layer. They breathed it in and immediately suffocated. But the priests? They were much taller. While the animals were drowning in the deadly CO2, the priests' heads were physically higher up, safely breathing from pockets of clean oxygen that sat comfortably above that heavy carbon dioxide lake. And on top of that, knowing the caves possessed this dangerous magic, they likely learned from experience to simply hold their breath during the brief moments they had to step into the thickest parts of the mist.
So, the absolutely crucial point to take away from this is that these ancient priests weren't just spinning superstitious fairy tales. They weren't executing cheap magic tricks to fool a gullible public, and they weren't necessarily con men. They were living in a reality where the physical evidence right before their eyes perfectly supported their deepest religious beliefs. They saw sudden, invisible death that they couldn't explain through the biology they understood at the time, so they logically explained it through the divine.
Actually, our source material hits the nail on the head here, beautifully stating, ancient mythology was an early form of data interpretation of complex geological and chemical events. And I want you to really let that profound idea sink in for a second. Mythology isn't just a collection of fanciful bedtime stories. It is the direct result of human beings encountering the terrifying, awesome power of the natural world and trying desperately to categorize and understand it.
Think about it. They observed complex geological and chemical data, invisible forces causing sudden death out of absolutely nowhere, and they logically interpreted it as the breath of the underworld. Using literally the only language and intellectual framework they had at the time, they built a perfectly coherent system. They took the raw input, dead animals, miraculously surviving humans, strange mists pouring from the earth, and processed it into a model that perfectly explained their world. In a very real way, they were early scientists. They just didn't have the periodic table yet to check their work.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. If ancient magic and literal gateways to hell were really just undiscovered chemistry and heavy carbon dioxide, what mysteries are we entirely misinterpreting right now? What unexplained phenomena are we currently explaining away with our own modern myths simply because we don't yet have the science to understand the invisible forces at play? Keep asking questions, keep looking at the data, and I'll see you in the next explainer.